Hello everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Files. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of America, places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Across these hills, rivers, and empty towns are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts, each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. In the heartland of America, where cornfields stretch to the horizon and small towns dot the landscape like isolated islands, law enforcement officers serve as the thin blue line between order and chaos. But sometimes they encounter phenomena that defy explanation, events that test their training, their sanity, and their understanding of reality. These are the stories of Midwest sheriffs and deputies who came face to face with the unexplainable, who ventured into darkness and found something waiting there. Now let us begin with our first story. It was late October of 2013 in Webster County, Nebraska. Deputy Mark Harrison had been with the Red Cloud Sheriff's Department for 6 years, patrolling the same rural roads where he'd grown up. The autumn harvest was nearly complete, and the air carried the familiar scent of drying corn and fallen leaves. The call came in at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. An elderly woman from town, Mrs. Eleanor Winters, reported that her neighbor's house on County Road 12 appeared to have been broken into. She'd seen lights moving inside, though she knew the Peterson family was on vacation until the weekend. Harrison knew the house, an old 2-story farmhouse with a distinctive wraparound porch, standing alone at the end of a gravel driveway nearly a quarter-mile long. As Harrison turned his patrol car onto County Road 12, the dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio. "Deputy Harrison, just confirming the Petersons are in Omaha until Sunday. Their home number is disconnected for maintenance, so we couldn't reach them. Proceed with caution." The gravel crunched beneath his tires as he approached the long driveway. The moon was nearly full, casting silvery light across the harvested fields. The farmhouse stood dark, except for a single flickering light on the second floor, visible through the large bay window facing the road. Harrison parked his vehicle and approached slowly, hand resting near his sidearm. The wind had picked up, rustling the dried corn stalks in the adjacent field. The front door stood slightly ajar, swinging gently with the breeze. He drew his flashlight and weapon simultaneously, announcing his presence as required by protocol. "Sheriff's Department, is anyone home?" No response came, save for the creak of the porch swing moving in rhythm with the wind. Inside, the house was in disarray, but not in a way that suggested a typical burglary. Furniture was arranged in peculiar patterns, chairs facing walls, tables pushed against doorways. Upstairs, in the master bedroom where Harrison had seen the light, he found an old oil lamp burning on the nightstand. The flame danced erratically, though no draft was detectable. The bed had been stripped of sheets, which lay folded in a perfect square on the floor. What struck Harrison as most unusual was the complete absence of any signs of forced entry, despite the open front door. As he completed his initial sweep of the house, Harrison's radio began to emit a strange interference, not the usual static, but a rhythmic series of clicks, like Morse code. He attempted to contact dispatch, but received only the same clicking pattern in response. Returning to the master bedroom, he noticed something he'd missed before. Small circles drawn in what appeared to be salt on the wooden floorboards, forming a pattern that seemed to emanate from the center of the room. In the very center sat a single child's shoe, facing the doorway where Harrison now stood. The clicking on his radio grew louder, more insistent. Harrison felt a sudden drop in temperature, so pronounced that he could see his breath in the beam of his flashlight. He holstered his weapon and knelt to examine the shoe, a small sneaker, size 2 toddler, clean despite the dusty floorboards. As he reached for it, the lamp flame extinguished instantly, plunging the room into darkness except for his flashlight beam. The clicking stopped. In its place came a whisper, so close to his ear that he instinctively recoiled. "They shouldn't have left you alone here." Harrison exited the house with deliberate speed, securing the scene and calling for backup from his patrol car. When 2 additional deputies arrived 15 minutes later, they found the front door locked from the inside. After gaining entry, they discovered the house exactly as Harrison had described, with one exception. The child's shoe was gone. The salt circles remained undisturbed. The oil lamp was cold to the touch, showing no signs of recent use. Deputy Harrison filed an incident report that night, noting the unusual circumstances and the strange auditory phenomenon on his radio frequency. The Peterson family returned 2 days later to find their home undisturbed, with no explanation for the events that had transpired. Mrs. Peterson confirmed that no child's shoe matching Harrison's description had ever been in their possession. The Red Cloud Sheriff's Department kept the case file open for 3 months before classifying it as unexplained phenomena. Harrison never again responded to a call at that address alone, though he continued to patrol County Road 12 for another decade before retiring. To this day, he cannot explain the voice he heard that night or how the shoe vanished from a locked room. No trace was ever found. It was January 2017, and the worst blizzard in 30 years had descended upon Dickinson County, Kansas. Sheriff Tom Martinez had been with the department for 22 years, but he'd never seen weather like this. The storm had arrived without warning on a Thursday afternoon, dropping 3 feet of snow in less than 12 hours and bringing winds that gusted to 60 miles per hour. By Friday morning, the entire county was effectively shut down, with only emergency vehicles permitted on the roads. At 2:13 a.m., the emergency generator at the sheriff's department failed, plunging the station into darkness and disabling most of their communication equipment. Martinez was on duty with 2 deputies, Sarah Jenkins, a 5-year veteran, and Mike Rodriguez, who had joined the force just 8 months earlier. The station's backup systems were designed to withstand power outages, but nothing had prepared them for a complete grid failure across the county. The first strange occurrence happened at 3:47 a.m. With the main radio system down, the department was relying on a portable CB radio for communication. Jenkins was monitoring the device when she heard a voice that didn't belong to any of the county's emergency responders. "They're coming up the road now," the voice said, clear as day. "The car with no lights." When Jenkins questioned the transmission, the voice responded, "I've been watching them for miles. They move too fast for this weather." Martinez took over the radio, identifying himself and requesting the caller's location and identification. The response came after a moment of static. "I'm at the old grain silo on Route 4. You can't miss me. I'm the only one out in this storm." The sheriff knew that location, an abandoned agricultural facility 15 miles east of town. No one should have been there, especially not in these conditions. What troubled Martinez most was that the voice didn't sound distressed or cold. It sounded calm, almost conversational. Rodriguez suggested the voice might be coming from a weather radio or some other broadcast source, but Martinez wasn't convinced. The transmission quality was too clear, too immediate. Over the next hour, the voice provided detailed descriptions of a vehicle approaching town, describing its movements as if watching it in real time. "It stopped at the intersection now," the voice reported at 4:52 a.m., "waiting for something, or someone." The intersection referenced was only 3 blocks from the sheriff's department. Despite the blizzard conditions, Martinez decided to investigate. He and Rodriguez bundled up and prepared to take the department's 4-wheel drive vehicle the short distance to the intersection. As they were about to depart, Jenkins called them back to the radio. The voice had returned with a new message. "They know you're coming now. They're turning toward the station." The transmission ended with what sounded like a soft chuckle, followed by static. Martinez and Rodriguez proceeded cautiously to the intersection, where they found nothing but snowdrifts reaching 5 feet in height. No vehicle had passed through recently. There were no tire tracks, no sign of disturbance in the snow. When they returned to the station, Jenkins was pale and visibly shaken. She had heard one more transmission while they were gone. "They're inside with me now. We're all waiting for you." The generator was repaired by county maintenance workers at 7:30 a.m., restoring full power and communication systems. Martinez immediately contacted the Kansas Highway Patrol and requested that they check the abandoned grain silo on Route 4. When conditions improved enough for them to reach the location, they found the facility buried in snow with no signs of recent activity. No vehicle tracks led to or from the site. The CB radio in the sheriff's department was tested extensively, but showed no evidence of malfunction or outside interference. Sheriff Martinez filed a comprehensive report on the incident, which was classified as unexplained transmission and filed away in the department's archives. Jenkins requested a transfer to a different division 6 months later, citing the blizzard incident as a factor in her decision. Rodriguez remained with the department, but never again worked the overnight shift. Martinez, who retired in 2021, still occasionally mentions the voice on the radio when discussing the many mysteries he encountered during his law enforcement career. No trace was ever found. It was a warm July evening in 2015, and Sheriff's Deputy Lisa Chenoweth was nearing the end of her shift in rural Fayette County, Iowa. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the western sky in shades of orange and purple. Chenoweth had been with the county sheriff's department for 3 years, following a brief stint in the military police. She knew these country roads better than most, having grown up in the area. At 9:23 p.m., she spotted a vehicle moving erratically on County Road J20, a narrow 2-lane highway that connected several small farming communities. The car, an older model sedan with out-of-state plates, was swerving slightly and driving well below the speed limit. Chenoweth activated her lights and pulled the vehicle over near an abandoned grain elevator, its skeletal frame silhouetted against the twilight sky. The driver was a man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and glasses. He seemed confused when Chenoweth approached his window. "Officer, I think I'm lost," he said, his voice tinged with an accent Chenoweth couldn't quite place, not foreign, but not local either. "I'm trying to get to Cedar Rapids, but my GPS keeps sending me in circles." Chenoweth noticed that the man's hands were trembling slightly, though the evening was warm and humid. After running his license and registration, which came back clean, Chenoweth offered to escort the man back to the highway. As she followed his vehicle, she noticed something odd. Despite the clear conditions and familiar route, Chenoweth herself felt a momentary sense of disorientation. The landscape seemed somehow different, as if landmarks were shifted from their usual positions. She shook off the feeling, attributing it to fatigue after a long shift. They had been driving for approximately 10 minutes when Chenoweth's radio crackled with interference. She attempted to contact dispatch but received only static in response. At the same time, the sedan in front of her began to slow down, eventually pulling to the side of the road. When Chenoweth approached the vehicle again, the man seemed even more confused than before. "I'm sorry, officer," he said, his voice shaking. "I don't know where we are. This isn't the right road." Chenoweth looked around and realized with a jolt of cold unease that he was right. They were on a stretch of road she didn't recognize, despite having patrolled this county for years. The abandoned grain elevator they had passed earlier was nowhere in sight. Instead, the landscape featured hills and trees that shouldn't exist in this part of Iowa, where the terrain was predominantly flat farmland. The moon, which had been rising in the east when they began their journey, now hung in an impossible position in the northern sky. "Stay in your vehicle," Chenoweth instructed the man, returning to her patrol car to check her GPS system. The device showed no signal, displaying only an error message. Her radio remained dead. When she looked up again, the sedan was empty, its driver's side door standing open. The man was nowhere in sight. Chenoweth drew her weapon and conducted a search of the immediate area, calling out to the missing driver. Only the sound of crickets answered. After 20 minutes of searching, Chenoweth returned to her vehicle to find that the sedan had vanished. No tire tracks marked its departure from the dirt shoulder. Her radio suddenly came to life with the voice of dispatch, asking for her location and status. When Chenoweth explained what had happened, the dispatcher informed her that she was only 3 miles from where she had initiated the traffic stop, not 10, as she had calculated. The abandoned grain elevator was visible in the distance, exactly where it should have been. Back at the station, Chenoweth filed a detailed report on the incident. A search was conducted for the missing driver, but no person matching his description was reported missing in the area. The vehicle's license plate number came back as belonging to a car that had been scrapped at a salvage yard in Des Moines 5 years earlier. Chenoweth's patrol car's GPS system showed no errors or malfunctions when tested by department technicians. The incident report remains open in Fayette County records, classified as missing person under unusual circumstances. Chenoweth never saw the man again, though she occasionally patrols the same stretch of road, always with a heightened sense of awareness. She left the sheriff's department in 2018 to join the state patrol, citing a desire for new challenges in her resignation letter. To this day, she cannot explain the 20 minutes of that July evening when the familiar landscape of Iowa became something else entirely. No trace was ever found. It was September 2011, and retired Sheriff David Mitchell was spending his autumn, as he did most days, fishing on the northern shore of Lake of the Woods in Minnesota. Mitchell had served as Lake County's sheriff for 28 years before retiring 3 years earlier. The cabin where he now spent his days had been in his family for 3 generations, a simple structure overlooking the vast expanse of water that formed the border between the United States and Canada. The unusual events began on a Tuesday morning when Mitchell noticed something peculiar near the tree line approximately 200 yards from his cabin. It appeared to be a structure of some kind, though he was certain nothing had been there the previous day. As he approached, he realized it was a small tower-like construction, perhaps 12 feet high, built from branches and logs in a spiral pattern. The craftsmanship was precise, almost architectural, yet no one had permission to build on his property. Mitchell contacted the current sheriff, Tom Redwood, who sent a deputy to investigate. The deputy found no footprints or other evidence of who might have constructed the tower. A search of the surrounding area revealed nothing unusual. Mitchell had the structure removed, but 2 days later, it reappeared in exactly the same location, identical in every detail to the first one. This time, Mitchell noticed something he'd missed before: small carvings on the branches, symbols that didn't match any known Native American markings from the region. The third occurrence happened a week later. Mitchell awoke to find not 1 but 3 of the spiral towers arranged in a triangular formation around his cabin. What disturbed him most was that he'd heard nothing during the night: no vehicles, no voices, no sounds of construction. His dog, a normally alert Labrador retriever, showed no signs of agitation, as if whatever was happening occurred outside the range of normal perception. Mitchell began keeping a detailed log, documenting the appearances and any associated phenomena. On October 3rd, he noted a series of parallel lines etched into the dirt path leading from the lake to his cabin. The lines were perfectly straight and precisely spaced, extending for nearly 50 feet. When measured, they were found to be exactly 7.3 inches apart, a measurement that held no significance to Mitchell or the investigating deputies. The situation escalated on October 17th when Mitchell discovered that someone or something had entered his cabin while he slept. Nothing was stolen or damaged, but objects had been rearranged with meticulous precision. Books on his shelves were sorted by color rather than subject. The cans in his pantry were arranged according to an unknown system. Most unsettling was the arrangement of photographs on his mantelpiece. Pictures of his family were turned to face the wall, while a single photograph of Mitchell as a young deputy was placed at the center, facing forward. Sheriff Redwood assigned 2 deputies to maintain surveillance on Mitchell's property, but they reported nothing unusual during their watch. The towers continued to appear with increasing frequency and complexity. By early November, they numbered more than a dozen, each incorporating more elaborate designs and symbols. Some featured what appeared to be astronomical charts, while others displayed patterns that changed when viewed from different angles. The phenomenon culminated on November 12th, the night of the first snowfall. Mitchell awoke to find every tower gone, as if they had never existed. In their place was a single perfect circle in the snow, approximately 30 feet in diameter, with no footprints leading to or from it. Inside the circle, the snow had melted completely, revealing the grass beneath, though the surrounding area was covered with several inches of fresh snow. The Lake County Sheriff's Department maintained an active file on the Mitchell property incidents for 2 years before reclassifying the case as unexplained natural phenomena. Mitchell eventually sold the cabin in 2014, moving to a small town 20 miles away. He never spoke publicly about the events of that autumn, though in private conversations with fellow law enforcement officers, he admitted that the experience had shaken his understanding of what was possible in the natural world. The new owners of the property reported no unusual occurrences. No trace was ever found. It was April 2018 in the Ozark region of southern Missouri. Sheriff's Deputy Ben Carter was conducting a routine patrol along Hollow Road, a winding stretch of State Route H that connected the small communities of Pineville and Jane. Carter had been with the McDonald County Sheriff's Department for 7 years and knew these mountain roads intimately, having grown up in the area. The radio call came in at 10:47 p.m. A truck driver had reported seeing a vehicle pull over to the shoulder near mile marker 23, followed by what appeared to be flashing lights that didn't match any emergency vehicle pattern. The caller had continued down the road but thought it unusual enough to report. Carter was only 5 miles from that location and arrived within minutes. What Carter found was both puzzling and concerning. A late-model sedan was parked on the shoulder, driver's side door open, engine still running, headlights illuminating the forest beside the road. No one was inside or in the immediate vicinity. The vehicle's registration came back to a Robert and Maria Henderson from Tulsa, Oklahoma. When Carter ran the plates through dispatch, he learned that the Hendersons had been reported missing by their daughter 2 days earlier after they failed to arrive at a family gathering in Springfield. Carter called for backup and began a preliminary search of the area. The terrain dropped off sharply from the roadside into dense forest, making exploration difficult in the darkness. As he swept his flashlight across the tree line, Carter noticed something unusual, a series of small wooden markers placed at regular intervals along the forest floor, each bearing a symbol that resembled a cross between a star and a spiral. The markers appeared to form a path leading deeper into the woods. When Deputy Frank Williams arrived 20 minutes later, Carter briefed him on the situation and proposed following the path of markers. Williams, a newer addition to the department, was hesitant. "Ben, this doesn't feel right," he said, shining his flashlight into the dark forest. "There's no sound out there, no animals, no insects, nothing." Carter had to admit Williams had a point. The Ozark night was typically alive with the sounds of wildlife, but the forest beside them was unnaturally silent. Despite their reservations, the 2 deputies began to follow the path of wooden markers. After walking approximately 100 yards into the forest, they came upon a small clearing where they found a disturbing scene. A circle of stones arranged with mathematical precision, each one painted with the same symbol as the wooden markers. In the center of the circle lay 2 sets of car keys, one matching the abandoned sedan on the road, and another belonging to a vehicle not present at the scene. As Carter radioed their discovery to dispatch, both deputies heard a sound that stopped them cold, a single, clear note that seemed to come from multiple directions at once, like a tuning fork struck against glass. The note hung in the air for an impossibly long time before fading into silence. When it ended, the forest came alive with sound insects, birds, animals, as if a pause button had been released. The decision was made to call off the search until daylight, with plans to bring in a full team and search dogs. Carter and Williams marked their location and began to make their way back to the road. As they approached the sedan, Carter's flashlight beam fell on something that hadn't been there before, a 3rd set of keys lying on the driver's seat of the vehicle. These keys were attached to a keychain bearing the name of a local motel that had closed 5 years earlier. A comprehensive search of the area commenced at dawn, involving multiple agencies and search teams. The Hendersons were never found, nor was any trace of them discovered beyond the abandoned vehicle and the strange clearing in the forest. The search was officially called off after 2 weeks, though the case remained open. The wooden markers and stone circle were photographed and documented before being removed as evidence, but analysis revealed nothing about their origin or purpose. Deputy Carter transferred to the Missouri State Highway Patrol 6 months after the incident. Williams left law enforcement entirely the following year, moving to Kansas City to work in private security. The McDonald County Sheriff's Department still receives occasional calls about strange lights and sounds along that stretch of Hollow Road, though no further connections to the Henderson disappearance have been established. The case file remains active in the department's cold case unit, periodically reviewed but never solved. No trace was ever found. It was November 2019 in Ashland County, Wisconsin. Sheriff's Deputy Rebecca Miller was nearing the end of her shift when she received an unusual call from dispatch. A truck driver traveling on U.S. Highway 2 had reported seeing what appeared to be emergency lights in a remote area near the county line, but when he approached, the lights vanished. Similar reports had come in from 2 other drivers over the past hour. Miller had been with the Ashland County Sheriff's Department for 4 years, following a career as a paramedic in Milwaukee. She'd moved north seeking a quieter life, though the vast wilderness of northern Wisconsin often presented challenges that differed significantly from urban law enforcement. The area described in the reports was particularly isolated, a section of county forest with few roads and no permanent residents. At 11:13 p.m., Miller turned onto Forest Road 237, a gravel maintenance road that led into the area where the lights had been reported. The moon was obscured by clouds, making the forest canopy above seem particularly dark and oppressive. After driving approximately 3 miles, Miller spotted something through the trees, a pulsing blue light, similar to emergency vehicle lights, but with an irregular rhythm that didn't match any standard pattern. As she approached the location, Miller's radio began to experience interference, not the usual static but a rhythmic series of clicks that seemed to correspond with the pulsing lights. When she tried to contact dispatch, the interference intensified, making communication impossible. Miller parked her vehicle and proceeded on foot, following the light through the dense forest. What she found in a small clearing defied explanation. A vehicle was parked in the center of the clearing, a sheriff's patrol car, though not from any department Miller recognized. The vehicle's emergency lights were active, pulsing with the strange rhythm she'd observed from the road. What struck Miller as particularly odd was that the car appeared to be from a different era, perhaps the 1970s, based on its design and markings. Yet it showed no signs of aging or deterioration. As Miller approached the vehicle, she noticed that the driver's side door stood open. Inside, she found a uniformed deputy slumped over the steering wheel. When she checked for a pulse, she found none. The body was cold to the touch, despite the relatively mild evening temperature. What disturbed Miller most was the deputy's appearance. He looked exactly like a photograph she'd seen in the department's archives of a deputy who had disappeared in that same area in 1978. Miller immediately called for backup, though her radio was still experiencing significant interference. As she waited for assistance, she examined the scene more carefully. The patrol car's license plates matched those of the missing deputy's vehicle. The equipment inside the car, radio, shotgun, first aid kit, all appeared authentic to the time period. Yet the vehicle showed no signs of having been in the forest for over 40 years. There was no rust, no vegetation growth, no animal damage. When backup arrived 15 minutes later, led by Sheriff Tom Jensen, the scene had changed in an impossible way. The patrol car was still there, but it was now empty. The body of the deputy was gone. The emergency lights continued to pulse with their strange rhythm, but now they seemed to cast shadows that moved independently of the light source. Jensen, who had been with the department since the 1990s, recognized the vehicle immediately from photographs of his missing predecessor. The decision was made to secure the area and return in daylight with additional resources. Miller and Jensen marked the location and documented everything they could with limited equipment. As they prepared to leave, both experienced a phenomenon that would later become central to the incident report: a sudden, inexplicable drop in temperature, accompanied by what Miller described as the sound of whispers in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood. When the full team returned the next morning, they found the clearing empty. The patrol car had vanished, leaving behind only depressions in the grass where its tires had been. No footprints or tire tracks led away from the location. The only evidence remaining was a single object lying in the center of the clearing, a sheriff's department badge bearing the name of the deputy who had disappeared in 1978. Forensic analysis later determined that the badge was authentic to the time period but showed no signs of age or weathering. The Ashland County Sheriff's Department maintains an active file on the incident, officially classified as unexplained phenomena with possible connection to Cold Case 7804B. Miller left the department in 2021 to pursue a degree in forensic psychology, citing the incident as a catalyst for her interest in unexplained phenomena. Sheriff Jensen, who retired in 2022, occasionally mentions the case when discussing the many mysteries of the northern Wisconsin wilderness. The badge recovered from the clearing remains in the department's evidence room, a silent testament to an event that defies rational explanation. No trace was ever found. It was March 2016 in Defiance County, Ohio, a place where the flat farmland of northwestern Ohio met the beginnings of the Appalachian foothills, creating a landscape of subtle transitions that mirrored the changing seasons. Sheriff's Deputy Mike Harmon was working the overnight shift, a routine he'd maintained for the past 12 years. The small department served a rural community of approximately 38,000 residents, and overnight duty typically involved little more than occasional traffic stops and responding to minor disturbances. Harmon had grown up in Defiance County, leaving only for a brief stint in the military before returning to serve the community he knew intimately. The sheriff's department building itself was a modest brick structure constructed in the late 1970s, functional rather than impressive. It had been updated over the years with new technology and security systems, but still retained something of its original character: scuffed linoleum floors in the corridors, the faint smell of old paper and coffee that never quite disappeared, and the weight of history in every file cabinet and interview room. Harmon appreciated these familiar elements, finding comfort in the continuity they represented in a world that often seemed to change too quickly. The unusual events began at 2:17 a.m., when the motion alarm at the sheriff's department was triggered. Harmon was patrolling the outskirts of the county seat, checking on a report of suspicious activity at a closed manufacturing plant that had turned out to be nothing more than stray dogs rummaging through trash bins. The notification came through his patrol car's computer system with a soft chime that immediately caught his attention. The building was supposed to be empty, except for himself, as the overnight dispatcher worked from a separate communications center across town. When he returned to the station, Harmon found nothing out of place, no signs of forced entry, no indication that anyone had been inside. He conducted a thorough walkthrough, flashlight beam cutting through the dim emergency lighting that illuminated the corridors when the main system was powered down. The motion sensors were designed to detect movement in specific zones, and the alert had originated from the administrative wing, where records were kept and deputies completed their paperwork. Harmon assumed it was a false alarm, possibly caused by an electrical issue or animal movement near the sensors. He reset the system and made a note in the log before returning to his patrol duties. The second alarm came at 3:42 a.m., catching Harmon as he was finishing a report on the earlier call at the manufacturing plant. This time, he was more concerned than annoyed. 2 false alarms in one night was unusual, suggesting either a technical problem with the security system or something more deliberate. When he arrived at the station, he immediately noticed that the evidence room door stood slightly ajar, which was impossible given that it required both a key and a numerical code to open with access logged electronically. This time, Harmon was more thorough in his investigation. He discovered that someone had accessed the evidence room, though nothing appeared to be missing. The room itself was climate-controlled and organized with military precision, each item cataloged and stored according to strict protocols. Harmon knew every piece of evidence in that room, could have told you the case number associated with each item, the date it was entered, and the chain of custody that had brought it there. Nothing seemed disturbed, yet the lock had been opened without leaving any record in the security log. What disturbed him most was the method of entry. The door showed no signs of forced entry, yet the lock had been opened. The electronic lock showed no record of the code being entered, and the physical key remained in Harmon's pocket, where it had been all night. The security log showed no record of the door being opened during that time period, which was technically impossible given that the system was designed to document every access attempt, successful or not. Harmon called Sheriff Dan Miller, who arrived within 20 minutes to assist with the investigation. Miller had been with the department for over 20 years, first as a deputy, then as sheriff. He had a methodical approach to investigations that had earned him respect throughout the county. Together, they reviewed the security footage from the hallway outside the evidence room. What they found was inexplicable. At 3:39 a.m., the hallway light flickered, and for approximately 3 seconds, a figure appeared in front of the evidence room door. The figure was humanoid, but distorted, as if viewed through heat waves or water. It seemed to pass through the door without opening it, then disappeared as the light returned to normal. The quality of the footage made it impossible to identify the figure or determine its method of entry. Miller replayed the segment multiple times, zooming in and adjusting the contrast, but the figure remained indistinct, its form wavering like a reflection on disturbed water. Technical glitch? Miller suggested, though his tone indicated he didn't believe this explanation any more than Harmon did. Multiple systems failing simultaneously? Harmon responded. The motion sensor, the electronic lock, and the camera all experiencing issues at the same moment. Miller shook his head, rubbing his temples. Let's not jump to conclusions. Run the diagnostics on the security system. I'll stay here and secure the evidence room again. We'll need to document this properly. The third incident occurred at 4:58 a.m., as Harmon was finishing his shift and completing the paperwork on the earlier alarms. This time, he was inside the station when the alarm was triggered, originating from the dispatch center, a room that was supposed to be secure and, more importantly, empty. The dispatch center had been relocated to a separate facility 5 years earlier, but the original room remained with some equipment still connected, though most of it had been decommissioned. He immediately went to investigate and found someone in the dispatch center, a room that was supposed to be secure. The figure was seated at the main console, appearing to operate equipment that had been decommissioned years earlier. The screens displayed data streams that shouldn't have been possible, showing information from systems that had been taken offline long ago. The figure's fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, though the equipment itself shouldn't have been functioning. When Harmon called out, the figure turned slowly, revealing a face that seemed familiar yet wrong, like a poorly constructed mask of Sheriff Miller. The resemblance was close enough to be unsettling, yet different enough to be deeply disturbing. The skin had an artificial quality, the eyes didn't quite focus, and the expression remained fixed in a way that human faces rarely do. "What are you doing here?" Harmon demanded, hand resting on his sidearm. The figure stood, moving with an unnatural stiffness, as if its joints didn't bend quite right. "I'm just checking the systems," it said, in a voice that matched Miller's, but with an odd cadence, as if poorly imitated. "Making sure everything is working properly for the morning shift." As Harmon approached, the figure dissolved into what appeared to be static or electrical interference, leaving behind only the scent of ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. Sheriff Miller arrived moments later, having been alerted by Harmon's call. Together, they conducted a thorough search of the facility, but found no signs of forced entry or exit. The dispatch center showed no evidence of tampering, though the decommissioned equipment that the figure had been operating was warm to the touch, as if recently used. Security footage from the dispatch center showed only Harmon entering the room. No other figure was visible on the recording, despite Harmon's clear description of what he had witnessed. Miller, a man who had built his career on logical explanations and evidence-based conclusions, seemed genuinely shaken by the incident. "I've seen a lot of strange things in 25 years of law enforcement," he admitted to Harmon as they reviewed the footage again. "But I've never seen anything like this. The equipment hasn't been powered on in 5 years. We had the electricity disconnected to that room when we moved the dispatch center." The decision was made to bring in a specialized security consultant to examine the department's systems. Frank Richardson was a former FBI agent who now ran a private security firm, specializing in unusual breaches. He arrived the following day with an array of diagnostic equipment and a reputation for solving cases that had baffled others. When Richardson began his examination, he discovered something that defied explanation. Someone had accessed the department's digital archives, specifically files related to cold cases and unsolved disappearances from the 1970s and 1980s. The access logs showed that the files had been opened at 4:58 a.m., precisely when Harmon had encountered the figure in the dispatch center. What made this particularly strange was that these files were stored on a standalone server that wasn't connected to any network, accessible only through a physical terminal in the records room. Richardson's investigation revealed more anomalies. The security system logs had been altered with a sophistication that suggested either an insider with detailed knowledge of the system or capabilities beyond what should have been possible. The digital trail was both present and absent records, showed that files had been accessed, but the method of access left no trace that Richardson's equipment could detect. It was as if someone had walked into a locked room, looked through specific files, and then erased all evidence of their presence while leaving behind the knowledge that someone had been there. Over the next week, similar incidents occurred at various municipal buildings throughout Defiance County. The figure sometimes resembling Sheriff Miller, other times taking the form of other local officials, was reported by multiple witnesses. At the county clerk's office, a night custodian reported seeing a figure that resembled the recently retired county treasurer accessing old property records from the 1980s. At the municipal building, a police officer from a neighboring department who was providing mutual aid during a training exercise encountered a figure resembling Defiance County's former prosecutor examining cold case files. In each case, it would access archives or records related to unsolved cases, then vanish when confronted. The descriptions were remarkably consistent: a figure that looked like someone familiar but somehow wrong, moving with an unnatural stiffness, dissolving into electrical interference when approached. The Defiance County Sheriff's Department consulted with state authorities and federal agencies, but no explanation could be found for the phenomena. Richardson worked tirelessly, setting up additional monitoring equipment and attempting to establish some kind of pattern to the intrusions. He noted that the accessed files all related to cases from a specific time period, primarily 1978 to 1983, and that they all involved disappearances where no bodies were ever found. Beyond that, no clear connection emerged between the cases that had been examined. The incidents ceased as suddenly as they had begun, with the last reported sighting occurring at the county courthouse on April 2nd. A clerk working late reported seeing a figure that resembled a former judge accessing records from a 1981 missing person case. Like the others, the figure vanished when approached, leaving behind only the scent of ozone and a computer terminal that was warm to the touch despite having been powered down for hours. A comprehensive review of all accessed files revealed no clear pattern or connection between the cases that had been examined. Richardson's final report suggested possible electromagnetic interference combined with shared hallucination, though he admitted this explanation was inadequate to address all observed phenomena. In a private conversation with Sheriff Miller, Richardson admitted that he had never encountered anything like it in his career with the FBI or in his subsequent work as a security consultant. "I've seen sophisticated hacking, insider threats, even attempts at technological espionage that seemed like something out of a movie," Richardson told Miller. But this was different. It was as if something or someone could move between digital and physical realms without leaving the kind of traces that should be inevitable. The physical evidence suggests someone was there, but the digital evidence suggests they weren't. The security logs show access, but the method of access leaves no signature. It's a logical impossibility. Deputy Harmon retired from the department in 2018, citing health reasons. In private conversations with former colleagues, he admitted that the events of March 2016 had deeply affected him, challenging his understanding of reality and the boundaries between the physical and digital worlds. He had trouble sleeping for months after the incidents, often waking with the feeling that someone was in the room with him, though he never saw anything again. Sheriff Miller, who lost his re-election bid in 2020, occasionally references the incidents when discussing the many strange cases that occurred during his tenure. In an interview for a local newspaper, he spoke cautiously about the events. "In law enforcement, you learn to accept that some cases remain unsolved, but the 2016 incidents were different. They challenged our understanding of what's possible. I can't offer an explanation, only a confirmation that multiple credible witnesses experienced phenomena that defied conventional understanding." The Defiance County Sheriff's Department maintains an active file on the incidents, classified as unexplained security breaches with possible paranormal elements. The file contains Richardson's report, witness statements, security footage, and various analyses conducted by state and federal experts. Despite periodic reviews, no satisfactory explanation has ever been proposed that accounts for all aspects of the phenomena. The cold case files that were accessed during the incidents remain unsolved, the disappearances still unexplained after more than 4 decades. Occasionally, A true crime podcaster or amateur investigator will request access to these files, intrigued by the mysterious circumstances of the 2016 incidents. But the connection between the accessed files and the strange figure remains as elusive as the figure itself. In the quiet hours of the night, when the sheriff's department building stands empty except for the hum of electronics and the occasional patrol car returning from a call, some deputies still report feeling a presence, a fleeting sensation that they're not alone, a flicker of movement at the edge of their vision. But nothing concrete has ever been documented since that week in March 2016, when the boundaries between the possible and impossible seemed to blur, if only for a moment. No trace was ever found. It was August 2020 in Divide County, North Dakota, a place where the horizon stretched endlessly in every direction, creating an illusion of infinite space that could both comfort and unsettle those who lived there. Sheriff's Deputy Jenna Carlson was on routine patrol along the Canadian border when she received an unusual call from dispatch. Multiple residents in the small town of Newnan had reported seeing strange lights in the sky to the west near the abandoned radar station that had been decommissioned in the 1970s. Carlson had been with the Divide County Sheriff's Department for 5 years, having moved to North Dakota from Minnesota to escape city life. At 32, she had already experienced enough of urban chaos to last a lifetime, seeking instead the quiet predictability of rural law enforcement. The vast prairie landscape took some getting used to endless horizons in every direction, with few landmarks to break the monotony. The abandoned radar station, a relic of the Cold War, was one such landmark, its skeletal structures visible for miles against the sky, a constant reminder of a time when this remote region had been considered strategically vital to national security. The Divide County region was sparsely populated even by North Dakota standards, with fewer than 2,500 residents spread across an area of over 1,200 square miles. Carlson had grown accustomed to the loneliness of her patrols, often driving for hours without encountering another vehicle. The landscape had its own subtle beauty in summer. The fields of wheat and canola created waves of green and gold that shifted with the wind. In winter, the snow covered everything in a pristine blanket that seemed to muffle all sound. But there was also an isolation here that could wear on a person, a sense of being disconnected from the world that most Americans inhabited. At 10:47 p.m., Carlson turned onto County Road 5, which led toward the old installation. The night was clear and unusually warm for the region, with temperatures in the mid-60s. A gentle breeze carried the scent of prairie grass and distant wheat fields. As she approached, Carlson could see the lights herself, not aircraft or weather phenomena, but something else entirely. They moved in patterns that seemed both random and deliberate, forming geometric shapes before dispersing and reforming. The lights themselves were unlike anything she had witnessed before, not the steady beams of aircraft or the gentle glow of stars, but pulsing orbs of white and blue that seemed to defy conventional explanation. Carlson pulled her patrol car to the side of the road, grabbing binoculars from the passenger seat to get a better view. Through the lenses, she could see that the lights were performing complex maneuvers, sudden stops, right-angle turns, instantaneous accelerations that would be impossible for conventional aircraft. She had seen military exercises during her time in Minnesota, but this was different. There was no sound accompanying the display. No roar of engines or whir of propellers, only an eerie silence that seemed at odds with the visual spectacle. When Carlson arrived at the perimeter fence of the abandoned facility, she noticed something that immediately struck her as wrong. The gate, which should have been locked and rusted shut from decades of disuse, stood slightly ajar. The lock appeared to have been cut recently, the edges still bright with fresh metal, not oxidized as one would expect after exposure to the elements. Beyond the fence, the lights continued their strange dance in the sky above the concrete structures, now closer and more vivid than before. Carlson called for backup before proceeding through the gate. As she entered the facility, her radio began to experience interference, not static, but a series of rhythmic pulses that seemed to correspond with the lights above. When she attempted to contact dispatch, her voice came back distorted, as if speaking underwater. Despite the unsettling nature of the situation, Carlson continued her investigation, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, revealing weathered buildings and overgrown access roads that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. The main control building stood before her, its windows dark and broken. The door, which should have been secured, hung open, swaying slightly in the breeze. As Carlson entered, she was struck by how clean the interior was, not pristine, but lacking the decades of dust and debris that should have accumulated in an abandoned facility. The air carried an unusual scent, not the musty odor of neglect she expected, but something vaguely like ozone after a thunderstorm. The equipment, though outdated, appeared to have been recently operated, with some lights still glowing on control panels, casting an eerie green glow across the room. Carlson's training kicked in despite the bizarre circumstances. She methodically cleared each room, weapon drawn, noting details that seemed out of place. Footprints on the floor, not the clear prints of recent visitors, but faint impressions that suggested someone had moved through the space recently, perhaps with some method of obscuring their tracks. In what had once been a communications room, she found coffee cups in a trash can not decayed with age, but appearing to be only days old, with liquid residue still visible inside. In the center of the main control room, Carlson found something that defied explanation, a series of monitors displaying what appeared to be real-time satellite imagery, though the technology visible in the room shouldn't have been capable of such resolution. The images showed various locations around the world, each with a timestamp indicating live transmission. What disturbed Carlson most was that one of the monitors displayed an image of her own patrol car, parked outside the facility, viewed from above with a clarity that suggested sophisticated imaging technology far beyond what should have been available in this decommissioned facility. The control room itself was a strange mix of old and new technology. Vintage equipment from the 1970s stood alongside more modern-looking consoles that seemed to have been installed recently. Wires ran across the floor in organized patterns, some connected to the original infrastructure, others leading to equipment Carlson couldn't identify. The hum of machinery filled the space, a low thrumming that seemed to vibrate through the floor and into her bones. As Carlson examined the monitors more closely, she became aware of a presence behind her. The air seemed to shift, temperature dropping slightly. Turning slowly, she found herself facing three figures dressed in what appeared to be military uniforms, though without any insignia or identification. Their faces were obscured by some kind of visor or mask that reflected the light in a way that made their features indiscernible. One of them raised a hand, not in threat, but in what appeared to be a gesture of warning. "You shouldn't be here," the figure said, its voice distorted and mechanical, as if filtered through some kind of communication device. "This area is restricted." Carlson identified herself as a law enforcement officer and asked for their identification and authorization to be at the facility. The figures exchanged glances before the same one spoke again. "Deputy Carlson, we're aware of your identity. That's why we're asking you to leave. There are things happening here that are beyond your jurisdiction and understanding." The figures moved with an unusual grace, their movements precise and economical. Though they appeared human in shape, there was something off about their proportions, slightly too tall perhaps, or with an unusual stillness that didn't match normal human behavior. Carlson noticed that their uniforms seemed to be made of a material that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, making them difficult to focus on, as if they existed partially in shadow. The situation grew stranger when Carlson noticed something on one of the monitors, an image of the control room she was currently in, showing herself and the three figures, but with a fourth figure standing behind her that she couldn't see when she turned around. The image on the monitor showed this fourth figure leaning close to her ear, as if whispering something, though Carlson heard nothing. The fourth figure appeared different from the others, taller, with proportions that seemed distinctly non-human, yet somehow familiar in a way she couldn't quite place. "We're conducting a calibration," one of the figures explained, as if reading her thoughts. "The atmospheric conditions tonight are optimal. Your presence is introducing variables that compromise the integrity of our measurements." Carlson asked what kind of measurements they were conducting, but received only silence in response. The figures seemed to communicate with each other through subtle gestures, occasionally touching devices on their wrists that emitted faint pulses of light. At this point, Carlson decided to retreat and await backup. As she backed out of the control room, one of the figures said something that would haunt her for months to come. "Tell your superiors that Station Zebra is being decommissioned permanently. All records will be purged at 600 hours. No one should come looking for anything here." When Carlson asked what that meant, the figures simply stood silently, their faces unreadable behind their visors. The mention of Station Zebra was particularly puzzling. It wasn't a designation she recognized from any military or government communications she had encountered. As Carlson exited the building, she noticed that the lights in the sky had changed their pattern, forming what appeared to be a perfect spiral before suddenly vanishing altogether. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the sound of her own breathing and the distant hum of the facility behind her. She returned to her patrol car, noting the time 11:42 p.m. and made another attempt to contact dispatch. This time, her radio came through clearly, though the dispatcher noted that they had been unable to reach her for nearly an hour. Backup arrived 20 minutes later, led by Sheriff Bob Williams. Williams had been with the department for over 20 years and had seen his share of strange occurrences in Divide County, but nothing quite like this. When they entered the facility together, they found it completely empty. No figures, no operating equipment, no signs of recent activity. The monitors in the control room were dark and covered with dust, as they should have been. The only evidence of anything unusual was a single sheet of paper on the main console, a printout of satellite imagery showing the Divide County Sheriff's Department, with the timestamp indicating it had been printed less than an hour earlier. Williams examined the printout carefully, noting the remarkable clarity of the image and the precise timestamp. "I've never seen anything like this," he admitted, running a hand through his graying hair. "Military doesn't have technology this good, at least not that they'd admit to." The two deputies conducted a thorough search of the facility, finding no other evidence of recent activity beyond the cut lock and the printout. The equipment in the control room was cold to the touch, showing no signs of recent operation, and the dust that covered everything appeared undisturbed. The next morning, Carlson and Williams returned with a larger team to conduct a thorough investigation. What they found was inexplicable. The facility appeared exactly as one would expect an abandoned installation to look after decades of neglect, with no evidence of the clean control room or operating equipment Carlson had witnessed the previous night. The cut lock on the gate was now rusted and deteriorated, as if it had been cut years rather than hours earlier. Even the printout they had collected the previous night seemed different. The paper had yellowed slightly, and the ink had faded, though it had been stored in an evidence bag overnight. The Divide County Sheriff's Department contacted federal authorities about the incident, but received no clear explanation. The abandoned radar station was owned by the Department of Defense, though they had no record of any recent activity at the location. When questioned about Station Zebra, federal representatives claimed no knowledge of such a designation, though their responses seemed carefully worded and evasive. The satellite imagery printout was analyzed but yielded no clues about its origin or purpose. The case was officially classified as unauthorized entry to federal facility with possible security implications. Though privately, most involved admitted they had no explanation for what had occurred. Carlson transferred to the North Dakota Highway Patrol in 2021, requesting a reassignment to the eastern part of the state as far from the Canadian border as possible. She never spoke publicly about the incident at the abandoned radar station, though in private conversations with trusted colleagues, she admitted that it had fundamentally altered her perception of government secrecy and the possibility of technologies beyond public knowledge. The experience had left her with a persistent sense of unease, a feeling that the world was not quite as it appeared, that hidden layers of reality operated just beyond ordinary perception. Sheriff Williams, who retired in 2022, occasionally mentions the case when discussing the many strange occurrences that happen in the vast, empty spaces of the American prairie. In an interview for a local history project, he reflected on the incident. "Out here, with all this space and so few people, you sometimes see things that don't fit. Most of the time, there's a logical explanation if you look hard enough, but every once in a while you encounter something that changes how you understand the world. The radar station incident was like that. It reminds you that there are things happening that most of us will never know about. The abandoned radar station still stands against the North Dakota sky, its concrete structures gradually crumbling under the weight of decades. Occasionally, residents of Divide County still report strange lights in the vicinity, though such sightings have become less frequent over time. The facility remains government property, though no maintenance crews ever visit, and no official explanation has ever been provided for the events of August 2020. Like many mysteries that occur in the vast empty spaces of the American heartland, the Divide County lights exist in that ambiguous space between documented fact and unexplained phenomenon, a reminder that even in our modern interconnected world, there are still places where the unknown holds sway. No trace was ever found. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable, particularly in the heartland where endless fields stretch to horizons that seem to shift with the changing light. In these spaces between cities, where small towns dot the countryside like isolated islands of civilization, law enforcement officers serve as the thin blue line between order and the mysteries that lurk at the edges of our understanding. The stories we've explored tonight, from the empty house in Red Cloud to the abandoned radar station in Divide County, share common threads despite their geographical and temporal separation. In each case, trained professionals encountered phenomena that defied rational explanation, events that tested their training and challenged their perception of reality. These were not tales told around campfires or whispered in darkened rooms. They were documented experiences of those sworn to protect and serve, individuals whose credibility forms the foundation of our justice system. What connects these disparate incidents is perhaps their resistance to explanation. The voices on the radio during the Kansas blizzard, the impossible road in Iowa, the spiral towers in Minnesota, each represents a fracture in our understanding of the natural world, a moment when the predictable laws of physics and reason seemed to bend or break entirely. The Midwest, with its open spaces and isolated communities, seems particularly suited to such phenomena, as if the very emptiness of the landscape creates room for the impossible to manifest. The law enforcement officers who experienced these events share another commonality. Their lives were invariably changed by what they witnessed. Some transferred to different departments or different regions, seeking distance from what they'd encountered. Others left law enforcement entirely, unable to reconcile their experiences with their professional responsibilities. A few carried the knowledge quietly, continuing to serve their communities while bearing the weight of inexplicable memories. What these stories suggest is perhaps most unsettling of all, that there are phenomena in our world that operate beyond our current capacity to understand or measure. The natural world, for all its scientific documentation, still holds mysteries that defy categorization. In the quiet moments between dispatch calls and routine patrols, in the darkness of rural roads and abandoned facilities, something else sometimes makes its presence known, not with dramatic displays or overt threats, but with subtle violations of the laws we consider immutable. Silence plays a crucial role in these accounts, not merely the absence of sound, but a quality of silence that feels active, intentional. The forest devoid of animal sounds in Missouri, the sudden quiet before the appearance of lights in North Dakota, the momentary hush before voices whispered in Wisconsin. These silences serve as punctuation marks in narratives that already strain credulity. They represent moments when the normal background of our world recedes, allowing something else to emerge. Memory, too, becomes an unreliable narrator in these encounters. Time seems to stretch or compress, details shift upon reflection, and the certainty of the moment gives way to questions in the light of day. The officers who experienced these phenomena often struggled with their own recollections, as if the events themselves resisted clear categorization or retelling. This resistance to narrative coherence perhaps speaks to the fundamental nature of these encounters. They exist outside our normal frameworks of understanding and thus cannot be easily integrated into our personal or collective stories. The absence of answers forms perhaps the most unsettling aspect of these accounts. Unlike fictional horror stories, which typically provide some resolution or explanation, these true accounts end with questions rather than answers. The missing persons remain missing. The strange structures vanish without explanation. The voices on the radio are never identified. This lack of resolution mirrors our real-world experience with the unexplained. Most mysteries remain unsolved, most questions unanswered. If you or someone you know has a true story to share, leave it in the comments below. The Midnight Files team investigates every credible account, seeking to document those experiences that fall outside conventional explanation while maintaining respect for all involved. The American Midwest, with its vast horizons and isolated communities, continues to be a rich source of such accounts. As long as there are rural roads patrolled by solitary vehicles, abandoned facilities standing against the sky, and small towns where everyone knows their neighbors, there will be encounters that defy explanation, moments when the familiar world reveals its stranger dimensions. Thank you for watching Midnight Files. Until next time, stay safe out there.